What's going on, guys? Nathan here, back again with another Final Fantasy set review for all of the best red cards within the upcoming Magic the Gathering Final Fantasy set, which releases on June 13th, 2025. We've already made videos for white, blue, and black. I'll be covering red today, and then we'll be making a green and then colorless and multicolored video as well. If you want to check those out, those will be linked down in the description. As usual, if you enjoy this sort of content, leave a like on the video. Always appreciate it. Subscribe if you want to see more. And if you want to support me and my channel, you can check out my Patreon linked below. We have a lot of cards to get through today, so I'm actually going to be reading more of the summary of what the card does rather than the actual card text, just in the interest of time. All right, our first card here is Lindblum Industrial Regency. We get an instant for 3 mana that makes a 0/1 wizard creature token that pings folks for 1, each opponent for 1 every time we cast non-creature spells, and of course we get that land on the back side. The going rate to create a 0/1 wizard token that has this pinging ability is about 2 mana, just based on the other Final Fantasy cards that we've seen, even just across color identities here. So Circle of Power is draw 2 cards, lose 2, create a 0/1 black wizard creature token. If you sort of rationale that the 2 cards is worth about 2 mana, then you have the 0/1 black wizard creature token being worth about 2 mana there, with the last ability, the +1/+0 and gaining lifelink, not really mattering too much. Cornered by Black Mages is a forced sacrifice, which is about 1 mana in my opinion, and then that 0/1 black wizard creature token is worth about 2. So just to show you guys the rate for Mage Siege here, I believe that it's a little bit below rate at 3 mana, but the upside is that it is instant speed. So if you're in a wizard deck and you're holding up interaction, you can go ahead and cast this on your opponent's end step if you didn't need to use your interaction. This is an insta slam into most wizard decks, and all is just going to absolutely love this card in a land slot, and also Vivi if you're in a wizard tribal deck there with Vivi, and you're going to be casting lots of non-creature cantrips and lots of low CMC artifacts with Vivi anyway. Definitely give Lindblum a look. I think this is honestly the most playable in terms of wanting to cast the adventure side of the other adventure lands. I believe probably Midgar is maybe the best, and I think this might be the second best. Let's move on to our second card here, Freya Crescent, which is going to be a 1 mana dork for equipment spells and activating equip abilities. So that's right, folks, we got our first 1 mana dork in red, which is awesome to see. Of course, Birds of Paradise, very playable. We always love to see that. We do have to step it up to 2 mana. There's only 1 unconditional 2 mana dork within red with Sunset Strike Master. So we are now adding to the repertoire of mana dorks for red, and I really like Freya Crescent. She will find her home into many equipment decks. Nahiri Forged in Fury is going to be scaling off of the number of equipments that you have, or Captain America, for example. Specifically, I would look at Freya in equip decks that don't auto-equip or need to get equipment out on the battlefield before you actually cast the commander, and the commander benefits off of those equipment that have already been played. That's where I would look to include Freya Crescent. But something like an Arden, I actually wouldn't probably play Freya, because you really want to be casting equipment first and then have Arden just auto-equip those for free. So then we move on to our next card here, Haste Magic. 2 mana instant, target creature gets +3/+1 and gains haste until end of turn. Exile the top card of your library. You may play it until your next end step. Now, this is a really interesting card because it is both offensive and defensive. If you want to use the offensive mode, of course, you're going to get that impulse draw just for your turn, and you can make use of that +1 and haste. But defensively, I actually like this almost even more because it's just a nice cantrip, and then you actually get to untap all of your mana and then use whatever card that you impulse draw off of the haste magic there. So for comparison, this isn't exactly on rate, but we're stapling a lot more things to the effect here with haste magic. For example, Wild Ride does not impulse draw you, but you can reuse it. Reckless Charge does not impulse draw you, but you can reuse it as well. Haste magic here, we are just condensing more effects into 1 card for 1 additional mana. So I do like the +3/+1. Again, if you play this on your opponent's turn, you actually get to have a sort of full impulse draw there, sort of what we call a delayed impulse draw, because you get to untap your mana and then play that card. So I really like this card. In Vivi Ornitier, honestly, this was came out after I made my Vivi deck, but I'll definitely consider adding it to Vivi as well. So anything that cares about its power. Also, Krenko Tin Streak Kingpin also cares about its power to make those goblin tokens, and does need that haste. So I think haste magic does definitely have some homes in casual commander. And that will bring us to our next card with Opera Love Song. This is going to follow that same line of logic here. It's a delayed impulse draw for 2, assuming that we can cast it on our opponent's turn. So we're really making use of the instant speed here. This is basically a Ren's Resolve at best case, and of course you get some extra modality with the pump effect there. But I actually don't like casting this on your turn. I'd rather wait until my opponent's upkeep to cast this and then impulse draw those 2. So again, all mono red decks need card advantage, and WotC has been leaning more and more into delayed impulse draw and impulse draw to give red the card advantage that it needs in casual commander. So I would look at this for mono red decks that really need that, you know, 3rd or 4th card advantage spell if you already are running Ren's Resolve or Reckless Impulse or something like that. Then we'll move on to Summon Brynhildr, 2-mana 2/1. Wow, this has a lot of text. Okay, chapter 1, exile the top card of your library. During any turn you may put a lower counter on the saga, you may play that card, and then when you next cast a creature spell this turn, it gains haste until end of turn. So this is sort of like combining that Ren's Resolve with a fervor effect for a little bit. The creature itself will go away after that chapter 3, so you only really get to swing with Summon Brynhildr once, but it is a 2/1, so we're not really playing this for the body. I think this is just a unique combination of card advantage with haste enablement. So it's saying all of the right things, and it does have a somewhat relevant creature type being a knight itself, and it can be recoverable from the graveyard. But I think, you know, while it does bring a lot of value to the table, I don't think any one of these particular things make me really, you know, make my eyes pop or make me really go wow at this card. So as far as commanders, you might want to look at making use of that haste ability with chapter 2 and 3. And also, once Summon Brynhildr does go to the graveyard, you actually do continue to get that haste if you play a creature on the same turn that the chapter 3 does trigger there. So this might be a look at within Ognis or something like Mr. Orfeo, where you want to be attacking right away to start getting your big creatures in for big damage. Probably more of a look here in Ognis because you're going to be benefiting directly off of giving your creatures haste. So I do like this, that it is a cantripping creature that also will give a creature haste, and that itself seems pretty good on the surface, but it doesn't really like scream out to me that it needs to like be instantly windmill slammed into any particular decks. And then next up here we will have Avalanche of Sector 7, because fuck artifact players. And then we move on to Mycetian Elder, 3-mana 1/3 human wizard. When this creature enters, create a 0/1 black wizard creature token with whenever you cast a non-creature spell, this token deals 1 damage to each opponent. Now, this is a common. This doesn't really look like anything special, but what I really like is the fact that this is a wizard itself, and it makes 2 wizard bodies, which is very important in wizard tribal decks that are looking to go wide. Again, if you're playing Inala, you get to make a copy of this paying 1, you get that 2nd black wizard creature token, and then if you're using any sort of go wide buffing ability, such as Shared Animosity, you're going to be benefiting off of all of those creature bodies. So definitely give Mycetian Elder a look for any go wide wizard tribal deck. Then we have Summon GF Efreet, 3-mana 3/2. Chapters 1 and 2 you may rummage, and then chapters 3 and 4 we add a mana. So this is a little bit below rate in terms of what it is doing. It's just a little bit slow compared to what we already have access to in terms of rummagers. So Veronica, for example, will attack and rummage and will actually give you card advantage with the second part of that clause. Bannon as well is going to allow you to rummage and then get some card advantage there. What I actually like about Summon GF Ifrit is its creature type being a demon. This is going to go straight into your demon decks because demons are quite expensive as a creature archetype, and so demons will either often look to either reanimate things out of the graveyard to compensate for that, or they will look to ramp into those demons as well. So GF Efreet does both, essentially. So, and there's just not that many creatures, demons with CMC less than 4. So this is just a nice welcome addition to the repertoire of low-cost utility demons. Then we'll move on to Von Street Thief. It's a 3-mana 2/2. Whenever one or more scouts, pirates, and rogues you control do combat damage to a player, exile the top card of that player's library. You may cast if you don't create a treasure token, and whenever you cast a spell that you don't own, put a more counter on each scout, pirate, and rogue you control. So I really like this as sort of the new de facto scout, pirate, or rogue commander. The downside, of course, being that you're limiting yourself to mono red, and that's going to really limit the abilities, or the card pool that you have access to. The most amount of creature types that we have access to out of those three is actually the rogue creature type here, and there's not that many rogues that actually give themselves evasion in mono red. So if we actually take a look within Scryfall, there's only 26 scouts that are in mono red, 49 for pirates, and then 87 for rogue before we have to start dipping into the changeling pool of cards here. So Von Street Thief, interesting design, and I like that we are sort of kickstarting a new tribal support here with scouts, pirates, and rogues. But I actually more like this guy in decks that are going to be casting spells that you don't own. So this might go into more of your pirates, like Don Andres style of decks. And then we'll move on to Zell Dinch, an interesting new landfall commander. 3 mana for a 0/3. You may play an additional land on each of your turns. Zell Dinch gets +1/+0 for each land you control, and at the beginning of your end step, return a land you control to its owner's hand. So this is going to be, I think, the de facto mono red landfall commander. I've actually been toying with the idea of brewing around this guy myself. The best landfall creatures you could hope to ask for in red are Morag or something like a Geode Rager. There's a few landfall synergies in mono red, but there's not that many ways to actually get a bunch of lands onto the battlefield. There's certain things like There and Back Again, which is going to be a little bit more clunky, or there's even like Tomer's Pick from MTG Goldfish, which is the 2 mana. If you target an indestructible land, you get to Rampant Growth and draw a card. I don't remember the name of that, but I'll have that up on screen here. So Zell Dinch, I kind of want to just build a mono red commander deck just to see, is it good? Can we actually build a mono red landfall commander deck and have that work? So interesting design here. Honestly, it won't really make the cut in most landfall decks with green because those are so souped up already, but it's interesting little commander choice here for mono red. Then we'll go to Gogo Mysterious Mime, 4 mana for a 2/2. It is a wizard. At the beginning of combat on your turn, you may have it become a copy of another creature you control until end of turn, except it keeps the same name, which is very important because that means we can now copy legendary creatures. If you do Gogo in that creature, you get +2/+0 and gain haste until end of turn and attack this turn if able. So there's only a couple of other options in red, specifically only in mono red. We have Delina Wild Mage, which can make non-legendary copies of creatures, but Delina herself has to attack, so she has to go into harm's way to get that copy. And then we have to start branching out into other colors here. Kadric will make, whenever another non-token legendary permanent ETB is under your control, you may pay 1. You can make a token that's a copy of it. It gains haste and then sack it. So Gogo is going to be played pretty much almost the same way as a Sakashima of 1,000 Faces, and this is going to be making just broken token copies of like big value creatures such as your Ancient Copper Dragons or Atali Primal Storms in mono red. I think this is a really cool commander in mono red, and I'm excited to see what people can build around copying just like big value creatures. But otherwise, if you're not in blue, this is another way to make a non-legendary I should say a legendary copy, but a copy of a creature that won't die to the legendary rule. Then we move on to the Fire Crystal, 4 mana for a legendary artifact. Red spells you cast cost 1 less cast, creatures you control have haste, and then 6 mana to create a token that's a copy of target creature you control. Sacrifice it at the beginning of the next step, and it of course has haste because of the passive there. So the going rate to give all of your creatures haste is about 3 mana. Of course, we saw Fervor in that prior slide, and Rising of the Day is, I think, more of the power crept version of Fervor at this point in time. You can go 1 mana less and go to Emblem of the Warmind, but that opens yourself up to be 2 for 1. So I think that the Fire Crystal, because it is the going rate, I should say, is about 3 mana to give your creatures haste, and the fact that we are now stapling a Ruby Medallion onto that effect, I think that the Fire Crystal is the most efficiently costed out of all of the crystals, and therefore I like it the most. I think this is going to be one of the best crystals from the entire set. And I think this will see a decent amount of play as you give all of your big creatures haste. So something like a Lathos Dragon Queen might want this because big red dragons want to get in for damage and they need that cost reduction to really put themselves ahead on mana. Additionally, you might give this a look in Krenko Mob Boss, although Krenko decks are pretty much solved at this point in time, so I don't know if you could really make a cut in Krenko for the Fire Crystal, but wanted to mention it anyway. Basically, the point here is that I would look at this for most mono red decks. If you're in green, obviously you're going to be playing the more efficient land producers, but the Fire Crystal is going to be a decent effect here if you're looking to combine a cost reducer with a haste giver. Then we'll move on to summon GF Cerberus, 4 mana for a 3/3 Saga Dog. Goes into Rin and Syria, ladies and gentlemen. We did it. Chapter 1 is Surveil 1, basically a non-build. Like, who cares about Surveil 1? Chapter 2, double. When you next cast an instant or sorcery spell this turn, copy it. You may choose new targets for the copy. Now we're talking. Chapter 3, when you next cast an instant or sorcery spell this turn, copy it twice. You may choose new targets for the copies. Now, this looks like just a really fun red card that you're going to be doing busted things with. The most broken way to, abuse this card is to play your Mana Geysers combined with your big X burn spells. We've all been burned out at the table by a big crackle of powers. That's pretty much what most people are going to lean into, in my opinion. Your things like Jessica's Will. There's also Inspired Tinkering. All of the cards that will give you both mana and card advantage stapled onto one spell. But I think really there's a lot of potential with GF Cerberus to just do fun stuff, and that's why I really like this guy, because copying an instant sorcery spell twice in a turn is very fun indeed, assuming that this guy can survive. So as far as commanders that you might look at this in, the most like broken commanders would be like Calamax or Storm. Again, Storm is like way too powerful to be in casual commander. She's more of like a bracket 4 commander. Calamax, if you build him fairly, could be kind of cool, but I would look more towards any deck with blue in particular that's going to have some really cool value instant and sorceries. Something, just copying something like an Elminster's Simulacrum, I believe. I forget the exact name, but I'll have that up on screen. Would be really cool. Or even just copying something like a Dig Through Time to get a bunch of card selection and card advantage on one spell. So I really like GF Cerberus. I think there's a lot of potential for this guy to just be fun in casual commander. Then we move on to summon Esper Valagarmanda, 4 mana for a 3/3 flying haste. Unfortunately, it is not a dragon. It is a Drake creature type. I'm not really sure why they chose to give it a Drake creature type. But anyway, chapter 1, exile an instant or sorcery card from each graveyard. And then chapters 2, 3, and 4, add red for each lore counter on the saga. You may cast an instant or sorcery cost that was exiled underneath summon Esper Valagarmanda. This is a really interesting card. I think its floor is sort of like a hulking raptor, where its ceiling could be more of like a Diluvium Primordial. I actually value chapters 2, 3, and 4 the most out of this card because, at its base, it's going to be making you 2 mana on the second turn, and then that will increase to 3 and then 4. So I think with summon creatures in Commander, people will typically not target them to remove them because they will go away anyway. And so it is nice also that this does have flying and haste, and I think the fact that it exiles an instant sorcery card from each graveyard and then you can cast those basically means that it is a little bit of card advantage stapled onto a big mana producing set of abilities there. So I think summon Esper Valagarmanda, if you staple ramp and card advantage onto the same card, that is where my gears get turning here. I just don't know immediately where we would look to play this card. Like, I don't know a deck specifically that's always looking to play instant sorceries out of their graveyard. I guess there's the Grixis commander that can do that, or we might be looking more towards the Saga creature archetypes. Terra Magical Adept as kind of the de facto commander for Saga creatures. There's also like Tom Bombadil that we've all been familiar with. Raidia, Summoner of Mist as well, has value stapled with summon creatures. So that, or I was even seeing this does come in the Terra Herald of Hope precon, which can be reanimated with Terra. But the problem with Terra is that this is just sort of a generic value creature in a deck that really wants to kind of assemble a board with Terra's reanimation creatures and then, go wide from there and buff their creatures. So interesting card here. The fact that it disables both mana and card advantage piques my interest, but it isn't really like a windmill slam into any particular deck that I can think of. Then we will move on to Ultimate Magic Meteor, one of the coolest arts here that's going to have a whole meteor impacting the Final Fantasy VII Earth, or I guess just the planet as it is called. 6 mana sorcery, deals 7 damage to each creature if the spell is cast from exile. For each opponent, choose an artifact or land that player controls, destroy the chosen permanents. And it does have Foretell for 6. So this is sort of like an overcosted solid board wipe, but you want to be casting this from exile every single time, but you don't want to be foretelling it. So I think that this goes into any deck that cares about playing things from exile. Prosper, Faldorn might give this card a look. Then we will move to Gilgamesh, Master at Arms, 6 mana, 6/6. When it ETBs or attacks, look at the top 6 cards of your library. You may put any number of equipment cards from among them onto the battlefield. The rest go on the bottom. When you put one or more equipment on a battlefield this way, you may attach one of them to a samurai you control. So this is sort of like a red armored Sky Hunter for 2 more mana, but we get access to even more equipment off of that trigger. And it is spectacular if you happen to have a Sigarda's Aid on the battlefield, because all of those equipment will immediately equip to a creature, and then the turn after, you can then swing with Gilgamesh to do it all over again. There's a ton of value here in Gilgamesh, and I think that it is appropriately costed here. I think 6 mana is about the perfect rate for this guy, because he's going to get you a bunch of mana advantage and card advantage with those equipments immediately being impulsed onto the battlefield, and then he can do it again. But 6 mana in 2025 Commander is a decent amount, so I think that this is pretty much appropriately costed and will go into a lot of equipment decks. Specifically, I would look at this for Cloud X Soldier. Cloud actually will be playing a lot of equipments that make creatures and then attach to them right away. So like your Job Select type of equipments, your Mirrodin type of equipments. And so Gilgamesh will be able to make you a bunch of creatures that are equipped all at once with Cloud, and then you can benefit off of Cloud's ability there for just extra synergy. And then Arden, something like Arden is going to equip all of those for free at the beginning of combat anyway. So assuming that Arden is on the battlefield, we're going to be cheating even more mana by equipping all of the equipment that are impulsed onto the battlefield with Gilgamesh. So just a fantastic equipment, or I should say addition to the equipment archetype with Gilgamesh here. And that will take us to our honorable mentions. There's quite a few of these, just cards that didn't quite make the cut, but wanted to mention them anyway. Self-destruct, 2 mana instant, target creature control deals X damage to any other target, and X damage to itself where X is its power. This will go into your Gruul Enrage type of decks, where you are looking to accumulate value from your own creatures being dealt damage. Then we also have side quest play Blitzball, which at the beginning of combat on your turn, it will buff a creature for +2/+0, and then at the end of combat on your turn, if a player was dealt 6 or more combat damage this turn, transform it into World Champion, which gives equipped creature +2/+0 and has double strike, and it does get to attach for free. I kind of like this in Voltron decks because it does give +2/+0 double strike and equips for free, assuming that we can swing with an evasive 6-power creature. That's the only place where I would play side quest Blitzball, where we have that sort of equipment synergy. Then we also have Strago and Realm, 3 mana 1/3 human wizard. We can pay 3 to spin the top, so to speak. Target opponent exiles until they hit an instant sorcery or creature. You may cast that without paying its cost. If a creature spell was cast this way, it gains haste, and then at the beginning of the end step, sacrifice this creature. I really like this in a deck that cares about casting your opponent's things, where specifically Don Andres will make 2 tapped treasure tokens whenever you cast a non-creature spell that you don't own, and then the creature itself will have +2/+2 menace and death touch, and of course haste with Strago and Realm as well. So we know that Wand of Wonder is a very fun card to play, and I think Strago and Realm will be a nice addition to all of the red cards that are just sort of fun cards to play as we get to spin into a free spell from your opponent's deck. Then we'll move on to Vincent Vengeful Atoner, 3 mana 3/3 with menace. Whenever one of our creatures control the combat damage player, put a 1 counter on Vincent. So this could be up to 3, assuming you have 3 opponents at the table. And then, or I guess if you give them double strike, even more. Whenever Vincent deals combat damage to an opponent, it deals that much damage to each other opponent if Vincent's power is 7 or greater. So my word of caution with Vincent is that it might get you killed because your opponents will tend to be afraid of damage that will be dealt to them without them actually having, any ability to stop that. So I also like this with combat tricks. If you swing with Vincent and he looks all innocent, but you have mana open, I mean, that's going to be a red flag to your opponents, but how can they possibly block? Assuming that you can, it can get through with the menace there. I also like this with any sort of damage amplifier. If you have like a City on Fire or damage doubler, then you will be able to deal assuming that Vincent can have 7 power, you can deal 14 damage to your opponents, which would be pretty spectacular with a damage doubler. Then we move on to Nibelheim of Flame, rather. 4 mana sorcery, choose a creature you control. It deals damage equal to its power to each other creature. If the spell is cast from a graveyard, discard your hand and draw 4 cards. So this is just another, I would say, a downgrade, in all honesty, from Chandra's Ignition, because with Chandra's Ignition, you do get the extra damage to your opponents, but the upside of Nibelheim of Flame is that you get the extra ability to cast at a later point in the game, and you get the draw effect there. So I would still probably play Chandra's Ignition because I care about the effect on the card more than the fact that the card can be reused itself. So, you know, take that for what it's worth. Then we'll move on to Summon Kujata, 6 mana for a 7/5 trample haste. It deals 3 damage to each of up to 2 target creatures. Chapter 2, up to 3 target creatures can't block this turn. And then Chapter 3, discard a card, then draw 2. When you discard a card this way, it deals damage equal to that card's mana value to each opponent. So I think this is sort of a new best Inferno Titan because it's going to deal 3 damage to up to 2 target creatures. I think Chapter 1 is probably the chapter that I care the most about, and with Chapter 3 being the second one that I care the second most about. It does have a trample haste 7/5 body, so it is able to swing twice before it actually dies. So I do like the fact that this can pick off 2 creatures, swing for a 7/5 trample body, and then possibly be reanimated later. So that's why it's an honorable mention there. Then we will go to Clive, Ifrit's Dominant, 6 mana 5/5. When it enters, you may discard your hand, then draw cards equal to your devotion to red, and then we can pay 6 mana to transform Clive into Ifrit, Warden of Inferno. It's going to remove, or rather fight a creature, remove a creature, and then it will add 4 mana. If Ifrit has 3 or more lower counters on it, then it will transform back into Clive. So it's going to be a lot of effects here. So what is the number of your devotion that you need in order to make Clive playable? And to be honest, I think we need a devotion of at least 5 in order to make Clive truly playable, because just having a 6 mana, discard your hand, then draw 5 for 6 mana is okay, assuming you're able to make use of that graveyard. I think that if you are running anything below 5, I probably wouldn't be playing this card. So as a commander, it's interesting, I guess, like, what are you doing with the discard? You know, that would be a question I would ask myself if I'm brewing with this guy. I think most decks are going to play this guy in the 99 though, but it's going to have to be pretty heavily red in the 99 in order to make use of that ability. I'm sure somebody has figured out some way to break this card, but I think you definitely need a devotion of at least 5 to be playing a 6 mana 5/5. So that's Clive. Then we move on to our last honorable mention, Random Encounter, 6 mana sorcery, shove your library, then mill 4. Put each creature card milled this way onto the battlefield. They gain haste. At the beginning of the next end step, return those creatures to their owner's hand. Speaking of a card that you would want to copy with Summon GF Ifrit, and then it does have flashback for 8 mana. So I look at this as an upgraded version of See the Unwritten, and again, red just has sort of the fun cards here where there's lots of anticipation as you mill the 4 cards and you see what those cards are. I really love these just fun stuff type of cards. It's an honorable mention because, of course, if you mill 4 cards, and even if you have 50 creatures in your deck, then that's only going to get you 2 creatures that you actually get to impulse onto the battlefield for free. And of course, they go back to your hand. So hopefully you can abuse some sort of ETB here. So here's where I'd think I'd want an ETB, really large creature, or some sort of attack trigger where I don't really care what happens to the creature. I just get the trigger and then that's enough. Obviously you want at least 3 cards, 3 creature cards on the battlefield for this to be like super worth it, but I think the vast majority of the time you're probably only going to get 2. So this card is definitely a heavy build around, and it's a little bit clunky, which is why it is in the honorable mentions. And that will take us to our top 3 red cards from Final Fantasy. And if we could get a drum roll, please, we have Go-Go Mysterious Mime, the Fire Crystal, and summon GF Cerberus. So Go-Go is going to be seen in a lot of decks as a Sakashima-esque legendary that can finally copy legendary creatures without them dying to the legend rule. Very excited to see that addition to red, and I think that's more of a design space that Wizards could lean into. The Fire Crystal itself is one of the most efficient, if not the most efficient crystal within the bunch. Of course, I think the blue one is probably the best, but only within specific mill archetypes. The Fire Crystal is more generic and more, well, it is efficiently costed and is more generic, can be found in a lot more decks. And then summon GF Cerberus is going to be just copying a lot of just fun instant sorceries. I just love doing things twice when you're in that sort of like copy instant sorcery spell deck. Very fun there. So that's going to wrap up my red Final Fantasy set review, folks. If you enjoyed this video, as always, leave a like on it, subscribe to see more, and if you want to support me on my channel, you can share my Patreon, and if you want to check out the white, blue, or black set reviews that I've made, those will be on screen now.